The session is about to start, the second to last session of the day, which is a sort of historical session here, and which is, we always have a panel that's more oriented towards the biotech investor side, and this is what we call the VC panel. And today it's chaired by Lisa Milton from Nature, who will, I think, chair the session and guide us through this this thing. We have also some people online.
Indeed. Thank you, Morten. I feel like I should stand up a bit. Everyone's been standing. I'll sit down in a minute. Thank you for staying on. This will be the fun session, I promise you. So yes, I'm a news editor with Nature Biotechnology, and I thank Morten and Alex for having me here in this incredibly beautiful room, and also listening to such extraordinary science. So it's been a treat. But why, you might ask, would an editor from a scientific journal be chairing a financing session, a VC panel session? Well, because at Nature Biotech, it's very important for us that whatever discoveries are made in the lab, that they have translational potential, that they go somewhere, that they become tools, they become services, they become therapeutics. Hence our interest in financing. And because we know that this transformation, this journey takes money, and it takes a lot of it. And there is a particular biotech model that has proved to work, to help these ideas that come from academia become sort of startups, and from startups to become to grow. And this biotech model, the traditional one, is like this. So you first get your funding, you work in academia in an institute, and then maybe you talk to your tech transfer office, and you get your IP sorted, and you end up with a startup, and then you need the money. So you'll go to angel investors, other investors who are interested in early stage, and then things go well. From preclinical, you want to go into the clinic, and then you'll be looking for bigger amounts to VCs. And VCs have a very particular, they have restrictions in that you can borrow money, but in 3-5 years, they need what they call an exit. So they either need for your company to be sold, or have a good licensing deal with a pharma company, or to go public. So then the biotech grows. But I'll put it to you that for the aging field, this is tricky. And I'll tell you why. Because aging is messy. So if you think about aging in terms of species, you have this it goes from, say, in the mouse, 2 years, to a whale, 200 years, and we're somewhere in between. So then if you look at within a species, different individuals, they age at different rates. So then, okay, you look within an individual, and the different organs age at different rates. Zoom further into that organ, and as we saw, some cells in that organ more age than others. And so, okay, you just dive deeper, and you have a cornucopia of pathways, of molecules that are all contributing to this process. So for the typical traditional investor, this is a problem, because typically, biotech or pharma, they think of investing in one indication, in one pathway, even better, one molecule, one target molecule, or even better, one gene that's mutated. So this creates a problem for them, and because it's risky, as Alex said right at the beginning, pharma are watching. Yeah, they're watching to see how the field progresses. But I'll put it to you that despite this, there is good news as I see it. two things. One is that the tools have evolved, and you have incredible newish tools, starting from the ability to take all the omics you can think of and apply AI to it, and you can now do that. Then you have things like single-cell RNA-seq that is amazing too. And then in terms of drug discovery, you have AlphaFold. This is just this month, Rosetta Fold. These are platforms that are open to all researchers. You have CRISPR, so things are looking good. This could accelerate things. And the second thing is that there is a whole crop of investors who are willing to take this risk and be creative in how they approach investment for aging. And this is where we get to our amazing panel. So I'm going to ask the first panelist, that's Maria, to introduce herself, and then we'll go to the rest of the panelists one by one, where they're all hooked up and looking in. So Maria, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Korovalenko, and I'm a scientist in residence at Formic Ventures. And we are a fund that invests in longevity companies on one hand, and in companies that are creating tools and platforms that accelerate biomedical research, well, with the end goal of moving longevity forward, of course.
Fantastic. Thank you. Anastasia?
Hello, Lisa. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be on this discussion panel today and to attend this conference. Thank you so much, the organizers. My name is Anastasia Georgievskaya, and right now I'm a CEO and co-founder of a startup called Healthyite. So in Healthyite, we're developing mobile-first technology to address the discovery of aging biomarkers of skin and skin health biomarkers. So initially, I'm a scientist by training, so I have a degree in biophysics. So right now I'm putting all that I have in Healthyite because we believe that our main goal and the mission as a company to help patients make conscious decisions about their skin health and wellness, and not just pay attention to the marketing messaging.
Fantastic, thank you. How about Paul?
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. My name is Paul Kohlhaas. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Molecule. My background is I've been in biohacking since the late 2000s, really exploring how therapeutics can be developed in online communities, similar to open source software. My background is originally in economics. I'm also an angel investor and LP in several biotech funds. So at Molecule, our mission is to enable decentralized modular drug development. What that means is that we try to connect researchers in academia or in startups with patients and interest group to help fund their research in a more democratic fashion. So in short, Molecule is a marketplace for virtualized IP, where researchers and biotechs can make their work discoverable, searchable, and then obtain non-dilutive financing for ownership in their IP, so a sort of a financial exchange. And this happens via a novel technology called NFTs that we actually had the pleasure to also pioneer with Milton. And yeah, we also help form organizations like VitaDAO that actually then use these mechanisms and novel frameworks to enable global bottom-up biotech financing. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Alex?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm Alexandra Baus. I'm a co-founder and investment director at Apollo Health Ventures. My background is in cell biology. So I'm actually a pharmacist by training, but did my PhD in cell biology, looking into mechanisms of aging already 13 years ago. And went into management consulting, worked for the biopharmaceutical industry for a couple of years. So went across that parts of the value chain. And 5 years ago, we started Apollo with the goal to invest in early stage biotech projects and really help build up startup companies that are focusing on the mechanisms of aging. We also incubate companies. That means that we are building the companies ourselves by bringing in the team, bringing in the strategy, and bringing in the initial financing. And yeah, as I said, mostly it's therapeutics focused, but we're also considering more tech or data or tool-focused approaches as well.
Great, thank you. Michelle, could you tell us about you?
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
And thank you for this fascinating introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Keller, and I work as a senior manager of scientific business development at Deep Longevity. And I'm a specialist in bioinformatics and bioengineering. And I started my career path a little more than 3 years ago as a scientific researcher in silico medicine under the supervision of Alex Javronkov. But over time, my range of expertise has broadened and evolved. And nowadays, my job is to build and maintain relationships with clinics and insurance companies in order to establish an integrated ecosystem. And every project and every product under my supervision is just another step towards a bigger concept, which we formulate as loss or longevity as a service. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Daniel, can I bring you in?
Yes, absolutely. So nice to meet everybody and nice to talk to you again, Lisa. So my name is Daniel Schieferdecker. I'm the head of investor relations at Longevity, which is a Swiss early stage longevity-focused venture capital fund. Background-wise, I spent 9 years in the private equity and venture capital industry for JP Morgan, PineBridge Investments, Harbor West Partners, and NASDAQ, both on the investment and fundraising side, mainly in London and the US. And we are one of the sponsors here of the event, focused on supporting emerging ventures in the longevity field. Hence the name Longevity. Some of our portfolio firms are represented here also on this panel. And we are currently also in the market raising a fund and looking for new investments. So I'm very excited to be aboard here.
Great, thank you. Patrick.
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you very much, Lisa, and all the organizers for this beautiful conference here. And I'd like to commend you, Lisa, on the new magazine, Nature Aging. I think it was overdue. Happy to see it up and running now. I'm Patrick Bogermeister. I'm a partner with Kizu, which is the venture capital arm of Forever Healthy, which is a private humanitarian initiative with a mission to vastly extend healthy lifespan. We're actually based in Germany, but acting and investing globally. We already have 14 portfolio companies, most of them in the US, one in the UK and one in Switzerland. Myself, I have a background in molecular biology, Alzheimer's disease to be specific, and my career stations included biotech analyst, the Swiss bank. I was a portfolio manager at the pharma company Novartis, but most prominently the last 15 years, I've been in venture capital.
Fantastic, that's great. So now I'd like to give the panelists an opportunity to explain a little bit more why their strategy is slightly unusual. And maybe I'll start with Alexandra, because you mentioned that you had some aspects that were quite like traditional investment, but others not. And if you could sort of point out what those differences are.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, that we are really interested in targeting the biology of aging. That means that when we are looking at opportunities, whether they're scientific opportunities or already in a spin-out, we usually put a lot of emphasis on the actual science and whether we believe that targeting this mechanism, the specific mechanism, will have an impact on healthy human lifespan or enhancing health span. So usually we look at that impact by looking at evidence that these mechanisms play a role in mammalian aging in mice. But then, of course, we know that aging is not considered a disease by the regulatory authorities. So we usually don't think of aging as a clinical pathway for us, and also not necessarily the age-related disease, because they're very heterogeneous. And so what we like to do is, when we look at an investment opportunity, we like to also think very hard about the strategy, the clinical development strategy. And usually that ends up being something that has a high unmet medical need right now, and where the clinical proof of concept doesn't take several years and several thousands of patients to actually see a signal, but rather, ideally, we look at patient populations that may have a specific genetic variant or a gene mutation that is exactly in line with the mechanism that we're targeting. And so we would expect that we are directly on mechanism and would see a signal in this patient population much more clearly than if we would target a very heterogeneous aging population. But really the goal is then to expand, learn more about the biomarkers, and then expand to broader indications after that. Additionally, we do look at IP very, very carefully. We don't do any repurposing of drugs or any natural compounds so far. We really pay a lot of attention that we can have novel and defensible IP. And we do like to come in very early. So we like to help shape the project. We like to work with people in academia that have exciting science and help brainstorm and think about how we could actually commercialize this in the strategy that I just laid out.
Sounds great. So in a way, many of the things that you mentioned are to do with the due diligence. That is probably the biggest part of your job. Is that right?
It is for the external investments that we make. I think it's even the case for the internal investments, but for the internal ones, or what I mean with internal is the incubation or venture creation that we do. There it is also a lot of actual company building, meaning we actually don't only do the diligence, we also actually lay out the strategy, or we think about what the strategy should look like and bring in the team and do the fundraising for this very early company.
I see, very hands-on. So, Maria, could you tell us what it is that you are looking for in a company that you'd invest in?
Absolutely. Maybe I should start with giving just a little bit more background on our fund. So it was started by Michael Antonov, who is one of the co-founders of Oculus, who got very interested in the field of longevity about 4 or 5 years ago, and essentially transitioned from tech, well, not 100%, but for the most part, he essentially decided to make a difference in the field of aging and started investing in various companies, and about a year and a half ago decided to formalize this activity and created Formic Ventures. So we're technically a family office, so we don't have outside investors, at least not yet. We really like to come in early, also, so we want to make a difference for companies, and as I mentioned before, we love people who are creating therapies to make humans live longer and healthier, but we also like companies who strive to make biomedical research faster, more efficient, more democratized. And speaking of diligence, our diligence is, well, there's a lot of it. At this moment of time, we look at a really diverse spectrum of different topics. So it's not just biology. It can be anything from proteomics to microfluidics, and you name it, really. We would like to start building companies and do venture creation, but maybe as a next step in the future.
Fantastic, thank you. So you mentioned this transfer from tech, from IT. So I wonder, Patrick, whether you could tell us from your company, how did this happen, and how did the interest in aging start up?
Yeah, we have some similarities with Formic. So our founder, Michael Grede, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, also has a strong IT background. In the 90s, he started WebDE, the largest German internet portal. The switch was actually made 5 years ago and was very clear-cut. Since then, no further investments in the IT space. Everything new has been in the biotech space and purely on rejuvenation. Biotech companies. Drug development is our focus. And to address another question that you asked earlier, what makes us different? Yes, it is venture capital, but like Formic, we're also technically a family office. So we have very short decision-making processes, and we are an evergreen structure, meaning that we have no pressure, time pressure whatsoever. And this makes it potentially quite attractive for companies because we don't need to give the money back at a certain time. And imagining the conventional way, I've experienced this, I've been 10 years with a conventional fund. You are in a consortium, which is always preferred by the VCs. Then you have 3-4 different funds. One of them needs to get out already in 3 years, the next one in 5 years, etc. So there's constant pressure for short-term results, short-term exits. And I think a lot of projects are lost by the highly sought-after trade sale, which is in the end just a change of ownership and doesn't really help the project, the patient, the treatment. We think different there. We are not attracted by large consortia. If a company has attracted already a double-digit amount of money, we wish them luck. We see ourselves as enablers, as risk takers. Sometimes we even finance companies alone if we are convinced by the science, by the mission they have. And also our preferred exit, I don't like the word too much, as you may have gathered by now, is an IPO and not a trade sale. And if I may, a third point that may also be quite different with Kizu is we like strong founders. We are okay with minority positions. And we try to have it a bit different than the conventional VCs, which always take the majority. Because in the end, they manage other people's money. If something goes wrong, they are asked, what did you do? And if they say, well, we just had a 30% stake, we couldn't do anything, then, it's a bit difficult to justify this.
Thank you. You mentioned strong founders, which makes me think of a conversation we had with Daniel, and I noticed that you mentioned that you invest in people. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, actually, that's what we discussed. And for us, what we look for in a venture is not only that the firm has, or the potential firm has, a strong protectable intellectual property with clear ownership. For us, diverse teams are very important. So diversity in any shape, really, whether that's gender diversity, disabled people, war veterans, because simply it's scientifically proven that diverse firms perform better, they are more creative, they are operationally better as well. So this is key of our screening criteria. For us, we also have other investment metric-like criteria, for example, confirmed proof of concept that we validate with our industrial partners, very important for us as well. And we look actually more for industrial acquisitions as we are an early stage investor. An important point in regard to the longevity field that we look also as part of our initial screening that the potential portfolio company gives a substantial innovative step to the longevity field. That's as important as IP or diversity. And what sets us apart a bit from the stage also, as an investor, is that we are also a C to Series A, a very early stage investor. That has several reasons. First of all, over the last couple of years, venture funds have been increased, and that means they go for higher tickets. That means we are in a less crowded market, but a very important market in the longevity field. Because if you want to support a founder, you need to go in there early and support them. In the biotech longevity field, it is difficult to underwrite deals, as everybody knows, and that leads to a scarcity of capital. You need to have a deal team that is very different to other private markets, investment firms, or venture capital firms, which has a highly scientific background, and we have this team, not only internally, but also in terms of our advisors. And in addition, what we want to do is we want to position ourselves as a partner throughout the life cycle of the venture. So we focus only on seed to Series A, but we have a partner syndication network that we help, that we use for deal sourcing, for underwriting, and also that we can be there as an early stage partner. But as the venture approaches to later stages towards the exit, we have other partners that we can bring in from the industry, from other venture capital funds, and we are very hands-on. Yeah? We are not only the investor, and we don't want to see money. For us, it's very important to support the venture that has the scientific skill set, but maybe on the business side, they need some, financial engineering, accounting advice, consulting, and that's where we come to play as well.
Great. So speaking of early stage partners, so you can't get much earlier stage than your platform, Paul, right? Could you tell us a bit more about this very exciting and sort of, I suppose it's groundbreaking way of doing things? You explained to me you had 2 different streams, right, within Molecule?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Lisa. So we're not a VC, but we're really a technology provider and platform with the aim to really turn therapeutic IP, what we're all working on, into a new asset class. And so if you think about what biopharma really consists of, it consists of data and IP that we encapsulate in companies to make it investable. And we believe that IP as a whole, there's a lot of research on why IP and patenting frameworks currently actually hinder innovation as opposed to incentivize them. And so we believe that IP is better placed outside of companies to enable accelerated research over kind of this monopolization that is going on. And that builds on a lot of learnings from the open source software space. So if we think about like how the Linux Foundation really really completely changed the way that we approach software, the way that we access software. And we believe the same could be done for medication. So we focus on early stage research where funding is really needed. So we're helping to translate discoveries out of academia or in really early stage biotechs and help bridge this valley of debt. And so our goal is to really make research globally discoverable, liquid, and then to also enable much better due diligence around the research. So what we do in essence, we build virtual communities around a project that can consist of executives, scientists, and stakeholders to help drive the project along. And from a technological perspective, we've developed a framework that is called IPNFTs. And you guys may have heard of kind of this craze that is going on in the art world regarding NFTs. NFTs are really a new form of displaying and capturing intellectual property. And it's really turning the art and music space on its head at the moment. And so what our IP NFTs enable is they would enable, first of all, the encapsulation of a specific research project through sub-licensing frameworks, or even of a patent or a patent portfolio. And from a technological perspective, they enable the immediate transfer of the IP. You could enable auctioning systems. You could enable the early fractionalization of that IP into royalties. And through that, early stage companies or even universities could kind of go on this journey of non-dilutive financing much sooner. And what we also do is we attach a secure data room to this IP NFT, which can track access and enables different features. So you can very quickly share the corresponding research data of a specific IP asset. And so what this means is really that a biotech lab or a university can host its IP as a portfolio in a similar way that, let's say, for example, a seller on Amazon would. So you have these Amazon storefronts, and that's kind of the lens that we're trying to approach this with. The goal of this really, or like a guiding research question for us as a company, was what if insulin, for example, was collectively owned by diabetics? what would that do to access and pricing of new therapeutics as we develop them? Specifically in the longevity space, one project where we've been quite instrumental in helping from the organization is BetaDAO, which is essentially a decentralized collective that is now kind of funding early stage research through this mechanism.
Great, I like this collective sort of approach. So now I'm going to bring in two companies that have been, I would say, wildly successful in their approach to financing. Anastasia, could you go first and tell us how you managed to bridge this risk aspect, and that you went in thinking one thing and then you quickly thought, this wasn't quite what I was expecting, and even so, why has your company been so successful?
Sure, thank you, Liz, appreciate the question. As you highlighted in your opening talk, investment in biotech and longevity, I assume, can be very risky because it just might not work out. It can happen to any startup, but I think in longevity in biotech, the risks even higher than average on the market. So initially, we as a company, I would say back 5 years ago, life was crazy. I cannot say it's not crazy right now, but it's just different type of crazy. So back in then, we thought that medical imaging could be a really good hot topic because it's quite easy to obtain medical images compared to other type of omics data. But this assumption basically failed because collecting medical images like CT scans or images with dermoscans, it turned out they're all not standardized and it's very costly to obtain them. Then we thought, okay, we will be very innovative and we will just do it with selfies. So people post to their Instagram and social media, 24/7. So they will deliver to make, a good looking picture so that we can analyze it and analyze their biomarkers. But eventually it turned out that it's not easy to take a selfie or take a skin picture with your smartphone. So we had to develop absolutely separate product that we're now providing to pharmaceutical companies who are operating in medical dermatology and to contract research organizations who are making different effectiveness toxicity tests just to allow them to make a standardized picture. So eventually it also became a part of our software product, but many risks emerge and you never know what will hit next. So I think as founders, we need to be prepared, and I think it's very rarely you find a founder who's not passionate about what he is or her is doing. But in the end, it's also a question if you can have, the stable motivation to survive all the troubles, to consistently doing fail again, then fail better. And this is how I think it's the only way to exist as a startup founder. So you might think, okay, the worst thing that might happen, we will fail. But, alternative to that is you will build a product that will be amazing. It doesn't yet exist and it will improve their quality of life for so many people. So talking about risks, I think it is worth doing that in the end.
Fantastic, thank you. Michelle, you're with Deep Longevity, and when it comes to speed, I don't think you can beat Deep Longevity to its trajectory. You were acquired by Regent Pacific within months, right? How did this happen? What was in place at Deep Longevity that allowed this acquisition, do you think?
Yeah, Lisa, thank you for the question. And Regent Pacific is a publicly traded company, so I will start my answer with a small disclaimer. Regent Pacific has recently changed its name to Endurance Longevity and has just announced the results of the interim earnings report. So it is possible for everyone to look at the performance of the company anytime. And as I personally specialize in R&D, what I say is not in any sense any investment advice and is subject to standard disclaimers. And talking about the trajectory of Deep Longevity, when we first announced and launched our platform, there was a lot of interest from the investors. And our parent company in silico medicine is probably the top one in AI for drug discovery. And that's why in a matter of weeks, Deep Longevity actually managed to raise a private round from a lot of highly expertised investors, many of whom are at this conference, and I'm so happy to see them all here. And the main reason, as I think, why Region Pacific approach Deep Longevity is that they are very familiar with this field of longevity, because their chairman is Jim Mellon, who is widely known as an investor who prefers to invest in early emerging businesses on a very early stage. And he himself wrote a book on longevity, so he can be considered as a longevity enthusiast himself. That is one of the key factors. The aging clock industry is a big trend today, and we've been in this field since 2015. And the first articles and publications on the usage of deep neural networks to age prediction were originally ours and were proposed by Dr. Alexandra Baus. And we actually have granted patents to back it up, and we even productized these clocks. And you can think of Deep Longevity right now as some kind of a factory producing aging clocks and trying to measure all aspects of aging. And we work on this concept of longevity as a service to integrate clinics and insurance companies. We have launched the app, and we are trying to bring all the community together. And when we were acquired, and we realized that actually a large portion of investors are not experts in the field of longevity. And this is especially a great problem in Asia. And in Asia, there are no experts which know how to exactly evaluate our products and tools. So Alex Zhavrenkov, who is a famous scientist in AI for drug discovery, has established and cultivated this industry in China. And he says that right now we have to wait for some time until the market actually will be more efficient in recognizing what we do. So as true industry pioneers, we have to show real business fundamentals and continue to publish even more papers with great science and actually provide more experimental validation for our clocks. And as soon as the Asian market will be ready and to acknowledge the tools and the possibilities behind them, this will be a very big boost for us. So, thank you.
Oh, fascinating. Thanks for sharing this different perspective. So with that, I think I'd like to open to questions to the floor. And I'd like to bring in Martin. There you are. Could we get a microphone to oh, they'll bring you a microphone probably. Oh, yeah, come, whatever.
Does this work? Hello? No.
Great. So, yeah, will you tell us about an initiative I think everyone will be interested in?
As soon as I can get the mic on. It's not on, right? 1 second. Nope. I can also start anyway. I'm pretty loud.
But we can't hear you.
Oh, but the screen can. Thank you. Does this work? Yes. Cool. So thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone on the panel. I guess maybe some people here don't have a startup yet. It is possible because we're not in San Francisco. And maybe you're wondering, how do I get funding for my research into longevity and aging biology so that we can create these new advances that are going to become, hopefully, companies and therapies and prevent us all from suffering from chronic disease. And so I would like to announce something called the Longevity Impetus Grants that I've been putting together over the last 2 months. It's a new type of grant funding with currently a bit over $20 million to give away to nonprofit researchers in longevity. Sorry, no companies. And there's kind of 2 distinguishing features of this. One is we want scientists to work on what they think could have the most impact on the longevity field. So all those projects that we talk about in the bar, but that you don't think you can get through an NIH review panel, please send them. If it's going to have a big impact and if you've got a good experimental plan, that's the kind of stuff we would like to fund, especially around biomarkers, robustness of aging research, figuring out, does this intervention really work across different organisms, etc., and tools to really understand the aging process and have a robust foundation for moving into human therapeutics. The other thing that's distinctive here is that we think scientists should be doing science, not doing paperwork. And so the application is going to be about 1 page with 2 figures. That doesn't mean you can just fire something off. It just makes it harder. And the review process takes 3 weeks. So 3 weeks after submitting, you will get an answer on whether this is going to be funded. The reviewers are all anonymous, but they are great researchers in the field. And I think that's about everything. There's a website called impetusgrants.com. It's currently in stealthy mode, but within the next 2 weeks, it's going to open up. There's an email sign up you can do there. So I encourage you all to think about what projects you would like to submit to something like this, and then I hope to see a lot of good applications. Feel free to find me, I guess, in the bar or in the breaks if you have more questions around this. And yeah, thank you all for contributing to the field.
Thank you for sharing this news. Thanks, Martin. So now I'll open up to the floor, or we'll take some Slack questions. Does anyone in the audience? Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. So Arthur asks, how do you calculate the valuation of a longevity company you're looking to invest in? Would you like to take that, Maria?
Sure. I think kind of in general, I guess assigning value to a company is a sort of art. And it's every situation is different. And I guess if we're talking about longevity companies, the vast majority of them are developing therapies against a particular disease. So this is your starting point. And I guess it's a matter of finding I guess the consensus between the founding team and kind of what I guess what the market is maybe used to, is one side of the coin. But of course, it all depends on what kind of technology people have, what kind of IP. There's so many different components that later on kind of distill down into a certain number. So, yeah, it's hard.
It's hard.
It's not easy.
Does anyone else?
Maybe add to that. I would say generally as a guidance for any early stage startup, also in the biotech field, you look at multiples valuation, you look at the company that you're trying to invest in, and you look for comparable transactions in the past over the last few years. 5 or 10, and you take an average. So it is part of that. And as the company matures and you have more data to underwrite the returns and forecast revenues and things like that, you can move to a more DCF-like valuation. But generally, it is a multiples valuation as it is for many other venture strategies. And the outcomes from the experience of the deal team and the scientific team, which has experience assigning multiples even in fields where there are not that many comparable transactions.
Mm-hmm. Any other comment? Or?
Yes, I also would like to chip in on this one here. Especially for drug development, I cannot speak to AI companies or tools where there are multiples, for example, for sales or for profit margins, etc. If you have a drug development company, preclinical, that is at least 10 years away from the market, these are useless normally, and NPV calculations can be tweaked by orders of 10 of magnitude easily. So and comparisons are also very difficult, peer comparisons, because longevity companies always think, and they're right to a certain extent, that they address a much larger market because it's even healthy individuals in the end that will profit from this. So it's mostly negotiation, and negotiation only. And there I would like to put out a word of warning, because I feel the last couple of years there's a kind of a hype where early stage companies get valuations that are much too high initially. And then comes what Lisa has mentioned at the beginning. At a certain point in time, again, if you're a drug developer, you will need double-digit amounts of millions for the clinical phases. And then you have to go to the VCs, and you will get what we call a haircut, usually. And if you're only financed by a few well-meaning individuals, angels, that already gave you a 20, 40 plus million valuation, you will come down to earth and maybe accept a much lower valuation just because it's outrageous. So I would utter a word of caution there for the founders, for the companies, to make sensible value increase steps. Otherwise, you will reach a kind of different value of death there.
That's a good point. I see Alexandra nodding. And Paul.
I would second that, because it's actually really an important caveat that people keep to have in mind. And it's much more valuable to start at a lower valuation and take the valuation increase if you really get nice data, and then you can use that data to justify your valuation later on with the later rounds.
Stay realistic then. So I'll take another question from Jose Navarro Betancourt. When you select a project to invest in, how closely do you follow the scientific developments? Do you help them to design experiments or analyze the results? That's a good one. How closely are you engaged?
I can talk to that because we are very close. In some cases, we are actually managing the whole process of, first of all, identifying the science, but then really working together with the scientific co-founders to lay out the R&D plan and really fine-tune that, and then, of course, track the progress in that. So and of course, help to readjust depending on the data. So we're very deeply aligned in the companies that we co-found. If there is already a management team in place with the drug development expertise, then we take the role of a traditional investor and have regular board meetings where we stay in touch and try to help where we can. But the companies that we start, we're really deeply involved.
Great. And how would it work for your platform, Paul?
So we increasingly believe that the power of community, I mean, this conference is a community, really, of people coming together, that the power of communities is really underestimated. And so what we try to do is not build companies primarily, but build communities around assets, and then also open source, or try to open source parts of those developments. And building community has a lot to do with messaging, with marketing, and with positioning, and actually access to information. So what we try to help starting researchers and young scientists with is really how they position themselves in this broader ecosystem to help ensure them that their IP or their project is protected in the right way, but try to get them to be more open about what they're building, because through that they can attract other great researchers to work with. They can see overlaps with other companies. They can much more easily obtain funding from the right investors. So I think it's probably, as many of my fellow panelists can agree, there's so much liquidity and capital in the world today, and actually choosing an investor that has a good fit for you and fits with your kind of mission and what you actually want to achieve with your research is incredibly important. So yeah, maybe as a few points.
Great, thank you. Actually, I have a question I'd like to propose that you answer, Daniel, based on our previous conversation. The question is from Adam, and it's, how many good ideas have you seen in the last 2 years where funding was likely available, but the space is lacking the right team or entrepreneur?
So for us, over the last 2 years, it's tough to say because we are just a year old. But we see the problem of many founders really at early stages is really the access to capital, and the sophistication of the investor, especially the VCs, is a big problem there. Yeah, so that on one side is a problem for the entrepreneur, but it's also an opportunity for early stage longevity focused VCs as us, because we compete in a field that has less other competitors. That means we will support a deal at a lower price. We can buy a good firm at a lower price and get a better return. And for the entrepreneur or founder, it is also great because he finds a partner and gets access to capital quicker. But to talk about, when you look at all the deals that we do see, and I would say we see a significant portion of all the deals globally in our area through our syndication network, scientific advisory board, and so on and so forth. And this is a very common problem. Yeah? And there's only so much capital for so many deals. If you look at venture capital as an asset class, overall, it is a niche asset class. And then you have a smaller niche that is biotech, and then you have a smaller one that's longevity. So it is a very competitive space. That is why we think more entrants need to be there at early stages to discover the great talents early on, support them, similar to Apollo, throughout the process, design their research and development, all of that as a close-knit partner, and then also guide them after your individual exit to further partners.
I see. Does anybody else want to chip in? If not, we have a question from the floor.
Hey guys, is this thing on? Hello, hello? Yeah, I think it's going. So, one of the critiques that I've seen levied against VCs working in the longevity space is that because so many of the companies here are moving through these stepping stone indications on their way to ultimately approaching longevity, that with the timelines that venture capitalists have to operate in before they have to exit their investments, the companies that are backed by VCs don't actually go to achieve any of the longevity goals by the time the VCs have to exit. How do you guys think about that in your respective funds and the challenges of being a longevity VC while also having to focus on getting a return and an exit to your shareholders?
Maybe I can take that one, but it may be a little bit of an unfair answer because Kizu is in a nice position that we don't have a time limit, and we intend to remain with the company all the way, which is very unusual. We're not just doing seed financing and maybe around A. We would like to support the company all the way to the market if need be, without any timing restriction on that part. But I'm aware that this is a restriction that most other funds have, actually.
Yeah, and I'm also happy to comment on that. It's really an important question because indeed the timelines for getting to an exit are really tied to the lead indication that we choose. But in order to really capture the value of the entire platform or the entire potential of the drugs that we're trying to develop, we make sure that part of our budget that we invest is dedicated to driving the health span aspect forward be it in terms of identifying biomarkers, be it in terms of testing these lead compounds or similar compounds in a health span assay, be it in maybe having a parallel indication that is more aging related. So there are a couple of ways how we want to make sure that we don't get stuck with just this one lead indication, but really make sure that whenever there is an exit or whatever, there is this potential of having this broad impact on aging as well.
Thank you. We have another question from the floor.
Yeah, this is a question for Paul more so. I find this kind of movement for decentralization in biotech really interesting and exciting, but I have to say I don't totally understand it. So one question that I have is, let's say I'm working at a university and I make a patentable discovery, if it's a small molecule or whatever. Typically the university would own the IP. So kind of what do you think the universities are going to buy into this decentralized movement? What would be the incentive for the university to change their models and accept this kind of a model instead?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. Thank you. So actually, over the past year, universities have increasingly looked into this model, specifically tech transfer offices. And I think University of Berkeley actually issued a couple of their previous discoveries as NFTs. This was more like more of a proof of concept, but there's a lot of appetite for this. Essentially, what you would do is an IPNFT can work in a very similar way as if a biotech company or a pharma company wanted to out-license the asset. So essentially, the university creates an out-licensing agreement with a potential buyer. And that sub-license to the project, ideally, it's actually not patented yet because we found that unpatented compounds are actually easier to move with and give the potential buyer much more, let's say, long-term flexibility. And we've also increasingly seen that universities are actually really not well suited to commercialize technologies. I think there's a couple of, a handful of universities across the globe that actually generate positive cash flow from their technology transfer activities. So the universities that we work with, increasingly, they have an upfront preference for cash as opposed to trying to claim the IP themselves. But they don't have the right networks or platforms to actually market their technologies or get them to the right buyers in most cases. So the way that this works, for example, one example is we do this through a sponsored research agreement. So essentially, there's a sponsored research agreement that is attached to this IPNFT. Let's say a lab at a university wants to fund a specific study that they're working on a small molecule, like you mentioned, for example, for $500,000. And then on the other side of the table, what we try to connect that university with is an interested buyer that wants to fund that project and that is also suited in carrying it forward. And maybe the previous, question was around exits. So actually in this model, an asset could sit with an entity, let's say for a year. That entity helps drive it forward and then it moves on to another entity. And this really changes the game a little bit in terms of like how long funders need to be invested in certain research, and it ensures that the IP is always in the hand of the highest bidder. If you wanted, for example, you can essentially enable valuation mechanisms through this. If your asset is publicly listed, you could let anyone place bids on it. If that's something that you wanted to do. I hope I answered your question.
Great, thank you. Morten.
Yes, so we are very close to the end of the session, but we can continue if people want to continue a little bit more. I think there's a lot of interesting discussion, so I think we should extend it a little bit, if that's okay with the panelists and okay with everybody here. I actually also have a question, and this a lot of the focus here has been on drug development, but what about platforms? For example, outnumber, which is not a drug company. Anastasia, right? So how do VCs see funding stuff like that?
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. I guess still being in, again, biotech and having same challenges and risk as biotech companies have, we're providing our services as SaaS. And when a VC hears SaaS, they get excited because it's probably seemingly not that risky because SaaS model has been around for some years. In biotech, I guess, with new interventions coming, new technologies, you sometimes need to invent the business models for companies, how we could follow that. So I would say VCs are putting quite a lot of pressure on us, wanting numbers and traction. I think it's on the one hand, it's again a blessing because it's quite straightforward what we need to do and what they want so that we can raise money. On the other hand, again, there is some risks related to the nature of different diseases, the potential to recognize them from our mobile-first technology. But in the end, I think good VCs are really trying to be helpful and not just focusing on the numbers, but asking what they can do, what interest they can provide. And they're also pitching themselves, telling, okay, what we can bring on the table. And I think it's really, really a positive thing. And I think it's great if you have a partner who can boost you. So we were very lucky with our angel investment, but was, by the way, made by Alexandra Baus, who is, pretty well-known person at this conference, and he has been super helpful. And I think if it was not for him, maybe we wouldn't become profitable, but we already are, because his advice and guidance was essential for us. So it's not only money. I guess you also search for expertise, attitude, and really being helpful and boosting the company.
Great, thank you. So I have a question here that maybe each of you can give a sentence or two to respond, because it's a very open question. And this is, how soon do you expect to see the first widely accepted commercial product, note product, in the market that makes a typical 65-year-old live 2 years longer? Who wants to start?
I can maybe start with a provocative answer. I guess that's already available. We may not have completely convincing data, but if you look at the meta study from the UK on metformin, maybe that this is already one of those, maybe rapamycin, you said 2 years, that's not too harsh a claim. I think some substances may already be out there, if that's what you meant.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, if you meant, if you meant new products, then in 2 years, so my guess it would be supplements, and in that case we will never know unless people do studies on their customers. Maybe some are already on the market at the moment. It's just hard to say. We need more clinical data.
Absolutely. I was thinking more in terms of services, or sort of like you can send in your samples for all your gut microbiome and your blood and maybe these are already going to deliver in 2 years. What does everyone think?
I guess I may have a comment on this. So actually, our platform, Young AI, is just what you're talking of, because it integrates all the biological data which is available from the patient, from simple blood tests and questionnaires and wearable device data to such intelligent data as microbiome and methylome. And actually, this is what we call our aging clock portfolio. And talking about the perspectives, our aging clock portfolio can actually help to discover if there is something available on the market. Like it was said, maybe this supplement exists, maybe there is a magic pill. And it's widely known that clinical trials are tiresome and lengthy, and what we can provide, and we are planning to do this, It's getting a clinical trial in-house by simulating the effect of a longevity-directed intervention via our aging clocks. So if our aging clocks can back up the notion of some supplement being effective, that is making a biological age of a person younger, then we can put more effort to push this product to the market, to actually make it undergo the real clinical trials. So this is the instrument which I find to be extremely helpful, because all the industries need to have a boost and to save some time and to be sure in the results of the simulation. So that is what we do at Deep Longevity. So actually, if you have some thoughts of interventions that may need to get tested, we can organize these in-house clinical trials for you. That's what I think. Thank you.
Sounds good. Anyone else? So we got a question from the floor. Yes, go ahead.
So this is Jonathan. We talked a lot about the problem, but also opportunity of bridging longer timelines and also higher risk. One mechanism that society deals with this is public-private partnerships. One example being EIC. For example, a lot of public money is going in very early in a structured way. Private money can then follow, seeing that we already lower the risk. Is this something that you see already exist? Or if not, how could we build such an ecosystem?
Yeah, nice question. Who'd like to take that?
The EIC schedule was mentioned from the UK. I think a second area where I see this very prominently is in the Benelux. Especially Belgium has a huge half governmental funds that are really burdening with money and helping startup companies a lot there. But it should be in more markets, I agree. This is a great tool.
Great.
If there's some final comments or final thoughts that any of the panelists wants to say, feel free to say them now. Otherwise, we'll move to the poster session drinks and then the bar very soon.